Do you know what this stick and this roll of toilet paper have in common? They are both toilet-related equipment. This is what we would use today, and this is what Moses would likely use. You wonder how? Today we are going to talk about toilets and Bible, toilets in the Bible, toilets of the Bible. Did you know that an average person spends 92 days sitting on a toilet during his or her lifetime? That's 2,208 hours, or 132,408 minutes, and that's a lot. And it almost certainly includes you, although you can be below or above average in this respect. Are you the type of person that uses his or her cell phone when sitting on a toilet? Or are you actually reading something like newspapers, if that's still a thing these days? Or are you actually reading the Bible? Is it even permitted to read the Bible when you are sitting on a toilet? Surprisingly, there are videos out there answering right this question, so you can have a look. Our question is different. Did you ever ask yourself, how did the Old Testament guys go about it? What Abraham's or Moses' toilet looked like, and how about the times of the New Testament? How Paul's toilet looked like, and dare we even to ask how Jesus' toilet looked like? The modern flushing toilet isn't really a new invention. It was first constructed in 1596. Unfortunately, it became widespread only in the second half of 18th century. The one from 15th century looked like this, and the one from 18th century looked like this. Before we move on to see what the Bible has to say about toilets, let's just spend a minute and appreciate that we have one. 1 in 3 people worldwide do not have anything close to a real toilet. That's 2.4 billion people. Not to mention the 1 billion that do not have access to proper water supply, so there is nothing they could flush their toilets with. A toilet is sometimes said to be the invention that saved the most lives. And indeed, diseases that can be prevented with proper hygiene kill millions of people every year. So last year before Christmas, when we were thinking with my family what to buy, we decided to buy a toilet for a community in Africa. This is of course not a flushing toilet because there is not much water to flush the toilet with, but it's a toilet. So let's now have a look at what the Bible has to say about toilets, and we will start our exploration of this sensitive topic in the Old Testament. This is a picture of the so-called pit toilet just below the summit of the traditional location of the Mount Sinai. Of course, it is nowhere as old as the Exodus story we have in the Old Testament. It was likely built around 300 AD, but still, it is a very old toilet on Mount Sinai. What more can you ask for? As far as the oldest mention of anything toilet-related in the Bible goes, here is the typical toilet equipment of an Israelite during the time of Moses. And here is what the Bible has to say about it. You are to have a place outside the camp where you can go when you need to relieve yourself. Carry a stick as part of your equipment, so that when you have a bowel movement, you can dig a hole and cover it up. Keep your camp ritually clean, because the Lord your God is with you in your camp to protect you and to give you victory over your enemies. Do not do anything indecent that would cause the Lord to turn his back on you. This text from Deuteronomy 23 describes rules for encamped Israelites. It is pretty clear to me that it is concerned with much more than just ritual cleanliness, that it was given as a way to provide practical guidelines, to provide life-saving rules. When an Israelite had a bowel movement, and I do like how GNT translates it here, it literally says, Shavatcha chutz, that is, need to sit outside. So when Israelite had a bowel movement, that is, when he or she needed to sit outside, he was supposed to grab a stick, go out of the camp, dig a hole, do his thing, cover the hole, and come back. The order is clear. Never be lazy, and never do it in the camp. Never be lazy to just leave it lying on the surface outside the camp. I feel like some tourists could take a lesson from this text. The second text I want to mention comes from Numbers 25. When the Israelites were camped at Acacia Valley, the men began to have sexual intercourse with Moabite women who were there. These women invited them to sacrificial feasts, where the god of Moab was worshipped. The Israelites ate the food and worshipped the god Baal of Peor. So the Lord was very angry with them. That's Numbers 25, 1, 2, 3. You can rightly ask, where is anything toilet related in this text? And the relationship is really quite obscure. Baal Peor, the Moabite deity mentioned here, became a famous Assyrian god and then, later on, in Jewish Kabbalah and in Christian demonology, transformed into a prominent demon called Belphegor. None of this has anything to do with the Bible, of course, but surprisingly enough, this prominent demon is traditionally depicted as sitting on a toilet. Go figure. So let's move on. Did you know that we likely have a toilet assassination described in the Bible? The story is rather long, so let me summarize it for you. The book of Judges describes the story of the king Eglon of Moab. He ruled over Israelites, imposed very heavy taxes on them, and then Ehud, an Israelite, decides to free Israelites from him by killing him, by assassinating him. And so he goes to visit Eglon, pretending that he is bringing the tax money. He cleverly makes all the guards to go away, leaving him and Eglon alone, and then he kills him. Then he locks the doors from inside and climbs down from the window. And then we read, when the king's officials came back and saw that the doors were locked, they said, "The king is probably inside relieving himself." They stood there waiting until they felt foolish, but Eglon never opened the doors. That's Judges 3:24-25. Relieving himself, that seems pretty clear to me. There are a few more details that support the conclusion that he was actually seated on the toilet when he was assassinated by Ehud. Sounds strange to us. Who would be welcoming guests sitting on the toilet, right? I will spare you the further details, you can look them up. Here is a somewhat similar story, this time with not so violent outcomes. At the peak of the animosity between the first Israel king Saul and the soon-to-be second king David, Saul was going after David and the following incident happened. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. That's 1 Samuel 24. David gets a perfect chance to kill Saul here, while he is helpless relieving himself. David does not use the chance as he does not want to attack God's anointed. And just in case you have been wondering what are the words used for relieving himself, both in the case of Eglon and in the case of Saul, the Hebrew expression sachach regel is used in both cases, and it literally means to cover one's feet, which obviously refers to the fact that you need to pull down some parts of your clothing if you want to relieve yourself, and that is still the same today. Before we move on to the New Testament, let's have a look at Talmud, the key text of Judaism closely related to the Old Testament. It was compiled sometimes between 3rd and 5th century AD. Talmud has a lot to say about toilets, but we will look at only one example. In Shed Beit HaKisad, folio 70a, of the Babylonian Talmud, it's written, the rabbis taught, on coming from a private, a man should not have sexual intercourse till he has waited long enough to walk half a mile, because the demon of the private is with him for that time. If he does, his children will be epileptic. The demon of the private mentioned here is something Jews of the period took over from Babylonian traditions. After all, this Talmud was actually composed in Babylonia. I will not go into any more details. We would be moving way too much outside of the Bible. So let's now move on to the New Testament. And we actually don't have anything to mention, because there is no mention of toilets or anything toilet related in the New Testament, unfortunately. But we can be pretty sure that Paul and others used them regularly. So here is a picture of toilets from Ephesus around the time of Paul, and here is a similar picture from Corinth. And here is how Nero's toilet could look like. This one is from Villa Pompea near today's Pompeii in Italy. I'm not really sure how that one actually worked. And that's about all we can add to the topic of toilets as far as New Testament is concerned. So next time you sit down on a toilet to do what one does when one sits on a toilet, take a moment to appreciate this tremendous invention. Most people throughout the history had it much more difficult when they needed to do something about their bowel movements. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.